So in that sense, I want to democratize the story of innovation. I want to make it clear that anyone can do it.
The basic question that a writer asks, I think, is, what should I write about? And, that's the biggest question. There's no help for you either. And it's a total mystery.
But what is common throughout history, throughout time, is that when you have that upstairs, downstairs thing, there's a certain amount of that you can maintain if you're on top through hard power and hard system.
We're absolutely delighted to be back here with our edition, albeit digitally, of JLF Houston. There are so many wonderful authors and speakers who you will hear over the next few days. And I hope they will power your imagination as they have ours to look into the future, into a brighter tomorrow.
On behalf of Namita Gokhale, William Dalrymple, Sanjay K. Roy, and all my colleagues at Team Bakats, Asia Society, and Imprint, we welcome you to the final session of the Day 1 of JLF Houston 2021 Virtual Festival. The Wrong End of the Telescope, Rabih Alameddine in conversation with Alia Malek. Rabih Alameddine's latest novel, The Wrong End of the Telescope, is a kaleidoscopic rendering of the many aspects of the refugee crisis sweeping across the Mediterranean. Following the story of a Lebanese LGBTQA plus doctor and her attempts at making a difference at a refugee camp in Lesbos, the narrative gives us a glimpse into the deep connection she forms with a refugee matriarch secretly diagnosed with cancer. In a session that evaluates the experience of alienation, displacement, and the search for home, Alameddine navigates through the complex tapestry of tragic circumstances and resilience amidst one of the world's largest humanitarian crises. In conversation with journalist and former civil rights lawyer Alia Malek. Rabih Alameddine. Rabih Alameddine is the author of the novels The Angel of History, An Unnecessary Woman, The Hakawit One, The Divine Collides, and the Story Collection, The Perf. In 2019, he won the Dos Passos Prize. Alia Malek. Alia Malek is the author of The Home That Was Our Country, a memoir of Syria, and A Country Called America, US history retold through Arab American lives. She edited Patriot Acts, Narratives of Post 9/11 Injustice 2011, and edited and co-conceived Europa, an illustrated introduction to Europe for migrants and refugees. Her reportage on Syrian refugees has appeared in the New York Times and other publications. Do follow our social media handles to get notifications on the upcoming sessions. In these difficult times, we have struggled to bring you JLF Houston 2021 without charging a registration fee. Please support as generously as you can to ensure a free, seamless, and continuous flow of knowledge. Simply click on the Support JLF option button on the right-hand side of your screen. Your contribution is greatly appreciated. Ladies and gentlemen, The Wrong End of the Telescope, Rabih Alameddine in conversation with Alia Malek. Over to you, Alia.
Hi, welcome everybody. It's great to be here with you, even if virtually, and it's wonderful to be back on this stage with Rabih, because I think the last time I saw you, we were in Jaipur together.
Exactly.
Yes. And first and foremost, I'd like to say Mabruk on the new book. It is very layered. I think a kaleidoscope is actually a very interesting way of describing it. I'm sure you will have objections to both. But before we start, I do want to acknowledge that things right now in Lebanon are quite tense. And I know your family's still there. I also have much family there. Just if there's, if you want to tell us if they're okay or if not okay, if there's anything, I just didn't want to leave that, pretend that that's not happening.
Oh, great, thank you. Actually, thank you for asking. And thank you everybody for being here. Yes, my family is okay. I mean, it's sort of good news, bad news. The good news is that they've been through things like this before, so they know exactly what to do. The bad news is they've been through this before, and it gets even doubly stressful. So it's like they're doing as best as can be.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much celebration of the resilience of the people of the Levant, but I've come to really sort of despise the celebration of that resilience.
Yes, me too, me too. And if somebody tells me, like a phoenix one more time, I'll shoot them.
Hey, Rabih is referring to the idea that Lebanon or Beirut always rises again like the phoenix, which derives from the ancient land of Phoenicia that Lebanon once was. Yeah, I mean, and many thoughts on that. There's been a lot of discussion in the United States about the way the anxiety of Corona has fundamentally re-altered people's brains.
Yes,
and I was telling a Syrian friend who now lives in Berlin, because he was sort of expressing how completely depressed he was now, as opposed to semi-completely depressed before. And I told him this is sort of what is being said, that, our brains are being rewired. And I felt the minute I sent that WhatsApp message, I knew I was going to get something wise in return. And he just said, we're Syrian, so Corona is like the least of, and I think
the least of our problems.
Yeah, the same that could probably be said of the Lebanese. Well, I'm happy to give more space to talk about that, but I'd also love to talk about the book and ask you a few questions about it. And the first would be, what was the idea of this book? How was it born? What did you think you were going to write about?
Oh God, always a difficult question. But simply because a book is born in many ways. A book is born many times. I like to talk that there's a section in the book that was written 22 years ago and was published 22 years ago. But the idea for the book came organically, as in, when the Syrian revolution started, or as they call it in Lebanon sometimes, the events, or lots of Syrians appeared in Lebanon, which they always have. As you know, the border is porous between the two countries. So all of a sudden, I started seeing all these different Syrian people on the street, and I just started talking to them, including somebody who applied to our neighbor who wanted to become a gardener. And so I just talked to people, and I became more and more interested, because a lot of the stories of the civil war in Lebanon got repeated. And I was obviously intrigued. And then I started doing interviews through the UNHCR. So I became official, as in going to different areas and be an official writer. I thought I would write essays, and I wasn't able to. I was too involved. I think I wrote one essay and one sort of blog thing. And then I went during the big sort of to-do in Lesbos, with all the drownings and stuff. I had friends who went in the beginning in October, and I decided I would go visit and see what I can do in January. And I did, and it was much more traumatic than what happened in Lebanon. And then I started trying to write about it, and I was unable to. I could not pull away. I could not find the right distance to start talking about it. I was too involved. I felt, the refugees were my family. I was part of it, and I could not. Like I said, I could not pull away, and it became truly confusing. At the same time, I was writing this short story with Mina, the character, and it was a completely different story. It was about Mina going to Beirut to confront her mother and her brother, trying to, ameliorate the situation and all that. And all of a sudden, I decided, since I couldn't write that novel, I had like 100 truly, truly shitty pages. So all of a sudden, Mina from one story comes into the novel, and all of a sudden I had that distance. I was able to pull away through her and how she would look at the situation, and that's how the novel was born. That's a little bit too long of an answer.
No, you gave me a lot of material to follow up on. I do want to say, when you said that a book is born many times, I of course thought of the first novel of yours that I read, I, the Divine, which actually is a book of first chapters, where the book just keeps beginning and beginning and beginning over again. And there's a touch of that in here. Your chapters, I mean, you reward your reader with a feeling of accomplishment, because I can finish many chapters very quickly because some of them are only one page long. But you said that, well, I wanted to ask you about that because I know you a little bit. I wouldn't pretend to know you a lot, but it did feel like the second person that you were always speaking to. So it's a novel told in the first person from Mina's perspective, and we'll get there in a second. And she is in conversation mostly with this non-present, unnamed, but I mean, I assumed it was a Rabih-like figure who had these experiences, had tried writing essays, had gone with the UNHCR. So, but yet I didn't feel like Mina was very, very far from who you were either. So I'd be curious, how did you find Mina's voice, and was creating that distance? Because for the people who don't know, she's a transgender Lebanese woman, also a lesbian, also a surgeon, right? So you had convinced me that I was like, at one point I was wondering if you were one of these, Middle Eastern people who had toiled as a doctor for years because they were smart enough to get into medical school, but had secretly wanted to be a writer. But I think you were never a medical doctor, right? Well, you did quite. But were you trying to build, because she is a layered character, and I'm just curious if all these different layers of identity were a way to get further away from you, because you said you wanted that distance, even though in the end, is she far away from you?
No, it's yes and no. I mean, this is what I mean by distance. Look, one cannot write, even whether fiction or nonfiction or journalism, one cannot really write without, I call it the Goldilocks distance, the distance that is just right for each writer. If one is too far outside of somewhere, you cannot see what you're writing about. If you're within or enmeshed in the subject, then you can't see it really. So it's the correct distance. Again, like if you want to write about Syria, if you're living in and eating Syrian and being surrounded, it's really difficult. Some part of you has to be outside of it to be able to write just a little bit. So for me, what Mina did, it's that she had, that she was trans is important. And she's half Lebanese, half Syrian, just a little separation. But more important to me is the fact that she was a surgeon, a doctor, which I'm not. I studied engineering, but for me, in my mind, the fact that someone can be a doctor is not about how smart someone is, because trust me, they're not smart, but how they're able, if they are good surgeons, to separate personal from what they have to do. And so that someone could be having really big trouble at home and at the same time can do, whatever they need to do. So since I was unable to separate because of my problems, and my neurosis of wondering, am I Syrian? Am I a volunteer? Am I a refugee? I identified with, I was being pulled apart. I wanted a character who could have the same things, be pulled apart in many different directions, but is able to accomplish what she needs to accomplish at the same time. So someone who's a little bit less neurotic than I am. So that's why Mina comes in.
And how did you find her voice? Especially because you're also already present in the book as the you.
She's one of those voices, sort of like Alia in Unnecessary Woman, that just had no, it just came naturally. The thing that I think probably why in this case is because I had written a short story, a longish short story with her in it. So the voice was already established. I just had to make her, it just moved into that. Yeah, I had it. I mean, I didn't have a problem with voice.
I wanted to read you a section from your book.
Oh, good.
Where Mina is speaking to that second person, that person who, you know, is somewhat you, and sort of challenging him as to why he set out to write this novel. I mean, it's a bit meta, but anyway, why did you keep at it for so long? Did you believe that if you wrote about Syrian refugees, the world would look at them differently? Did you hope that readers would empathize, inhabit a refugee's skin for a few hours, as if that were some kind of panacea? You still hoped, even though it had never happened. At best, you would have written a novel that was an emotional palliative for some couple in suburbia. For a few moments, they think how terrible it was for these refugees. They get outraged on social media for 10 minutes, but then they pour another glass of Chardonnay. Empathy is overrated. So in the first instance, I felt like there was a lot of cathartic sentences that were written by you in this book, maybe cathartic for you, but cathartic for many of us reading along with you. But I am curious, why did you keep at it for so long? And did you believe that if you wrote about Syrian refugees, the world would look at them differently? Did you want your readers to empathize?
No. See, empathy for me is, like she says, empathy is overrated. No, I wanted my readers to get off the couch and do something, which is never going to happen. But I keep saying this, it's the one thing that makes for good literature, that whether I achieve it or not, obviously I don't. We don't change anything for the most part.
Well, I mean, that sounds a little bit like two contradictory ideas, because you want it to move them,
Yes.
but can they be moved without empathy?
Well, I mean, you say contradictory ideas as if that's abnormal. For me, I hold contradictory ideas all the time. It's my nature. So I don't have an issue with that. I believe that writing books is completely useless, and I believe that writing books is the greatest achievement of humankind. So I can hold both at the same time, and it's like a tennis match in my head, going like doop, 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 doop.
But I'm curious. But what emotion do you think it is that would get people up off the couch? Because this is something when I talk about with my journalism students all the time, right? Because they're people who very effectively use, try to evoke the sympathy of their readers, and which oftentimes denies the people living those experiences their humanity. And there's this idea that if you can report or write from a place of empathy, that's your best shot at getting people to care. What emotion?
It's like this is in many ways what the theme of the book is. Can you get people to care? And the idea is no, you can't. You can get them to empathize, but most people will move on within 30 seconds. If you're lucky, 10 minutes. The thing is that why does one go and help refugees if whatever we do is not really helping? And the answer to that is because not trying is a crime. So why do I spend years writing a book that I think will affect nothing in the end? It's because not writing it is a crime. One has to try, even in impossible odds. So I keep, it's like, this is when you say contradictory ideas. I am both a horrible pessimist and a fabulous optimist at the same time. That nothing I will do will change anything. And at the same time, I have hope that I can change the world with just one book. As ridiculous as it sounds, it's being able to live with those two is what makes for great volunteers who help and always help. And it makes for good writing. The idea that you can see that most likely nothing ever is going to change. Yet, you do.
So in your mind, who was the audience for the book?
No one. I mean, and it's really important. and there are many jokes in the book about, who's going to, who is that writer, who's not me, but me, who is he, writing for? And I've said it many times. In Lebanon, I'm accused of writing for, American audiences. In America, I'm accused for writing for a Lebanese audience. And the truth is, I don't give a fuck about either one of them. I write for me. I write the best book I can and leave it and hope for the best in many ways. But it's not written for refugees, obviously. It's not written for a Western audience looking for, some sort of satisfaction about refugees, that they think they can be smart and liberal by reading about the other. But at the same time, it might be what people will see. They're not my audience.
Has anybody and I know you're on book tour. I'm curious, has there been any reaction to your portrayals of Syrian refugees, whether they've gone against expectations, met expectations?
No, actually, I usually bring the subject up of, power and who gets to speak for whom. And it's interesting to me that some of the questions are always, who has the right to speak? If I am not a trans woman, can I write in the voice of a trans woman? And, but nobody ever asks me, if I am not a refugee, can I talk for the refugees?
That's interesting.
And I think it's a fascinating thing. It's like what is current right now. What's the general topic? But I'm fascinated by this subject. Who gets to write? Who gets to speak? And I definitely understand the power that in many ways that I have, as little as it is, which is that I'm an established writer. So whatever happens, some people will read me. I'd like much more people to read me, but for the most part, I am read. So that I can write about refugees, but no one listens to them. No one. It's like I don't like the term "they're voiceless" because obviously they have voices. It's just that no one listened to these voices. So even if a refugee wrote a novel, I'm not sure how or whether it will be published. So what happens is that all of a sudden I have this responsibility in some ways of I'm speaking for people who the world does not listen to. And in some ways, that's what was so helpful about Mina being a trans woman and being somebody who, society does not necessarily look on with favor. And at the same time, she's a surgeon, so society does. And so this whole sort of power dynamics play in the novel. And I thought about it for a long time as to why and how. And the truth is, unfortunately or fortunately, I don't have many options. It's not like I go, well, I'm not going to speak for them. And I am not speaking for them. I am creating characters. But it troubles me again that we don't hear, for the most part, even when they're being interviewed by journalists, what we're hearing is the interpretation of the journalist. We never actually get to listen to the powerless, So I kept thinking, I've said it before. I said it in an interview in Bomb magazine that what changed my life and what got me to write this book is to actually sit with refugees and talk to them and realizing, oh my God, it's my story. And, I don't have to tell you, for me, there's not really that much of a difference between Syrians and Lebanese, so it's like I would be looking at somebody who looks like my aunt and she's telling me this horrific story, and I begin to understand that it's my story as much. So it's a difficult question, difficult.
Well, I mean, to be fair, exile, displacement, the discombobulation that derives from that, it takes a moment to get your footing again. But there is actually literature and art that is being produced by Syrian refugees. Obviously, there are already ones who were working as artists and playwrights before, and I think, and you hinted at the scene in Berlin a little bit. And obviously, Berlin has sort of become the center of the Syrian intelligentsia in exile in a bit. I would be curious, how do you, because I still haven't heard how the book has been received by the different communities that you could potentially offend, if you want to put it that way, in taking on a voice. But if you had been a straight white man, not from the Middle East, not with your own experience of migration and displacement, do you think, what do you think the reaction of the, would there have been a reaction from the literary world?
I hope so. I hope so. I mean, again, let's put it this way. Would a white person from, straight white person be able to identify with the various kinds of refugees and be able to write about them with sympathy and respect? It could happen. It could happen. It rarely does, though, and the reason is what I would call power dynamics, which is I may not be able to write about a refugee, but I can write. I mean, I do. I cannot feel what they feel, but I can imagine because I've had similar experiences. So the trouble is for me is who can imagine that, and if someone can imagine honestly and respectfully, I'd see no problem with it. But it should be looked at. It should be looked at. Have I encountered, various groups who would be offended by what I wrote? Not yet. But I wouldn't be surprised. It's happened many, many times before. I'm an equal opportunity offender.
I'd like to know, because you had to take on many identities that you don't know, being a doctor, being a lesbian, being trans, being a refugee. And I agree, there is a commonality. I mean, you said from the beginning that part of what's triggering about, even before Lebanon was in its current crisis, just being encountered with sort of hints of the past in the newly displaced Syrians in Lebanon. But what was your process it sounds like you did go to Lesbos, for example. So you weren't, what was your process to understand all these different contexts and these different, lived experiences that you were hoping to marshal for the book?
Well, a lot of it has to do with, how I live my life. I have the most difficult actually was, the surgeon part. Like the trans, a lot of my friends are trans. I mean, a lot. As in, I see them every day. So that is helpful. I know their stories, I know their feelings, and then what's even more important is that, I have one friend who has read the book 4 times. The poor thing, I forced her to see if there's anything that sounds off, so that was easy for me. I wrote, for example, about Deir ez-Zor, even though I've never really been there, but my father used to go hunting there all the time, and he would come back with stories. So I heard these stories constantly. The thing about imagining a surgeon, and I think a lot of it has to do with my biases that that they're able to separate or stuff. But what I had to do in the end was, I think I talked to 7 different doctors and extensively. Including, including oncologists, including, surgeons. And my favorite is this woman, Fatima Karaki, who is a doctor who specializes in refugee health. And she was one who pointed out, like, no, you can't take that out of the country to Lesbos, because she had been to Lesbos like so many times that, you know, this, like oxycodone, you can't, I had her taking a bag of oxycodone. It's like, no, you can't. That's a controlled substance. She can't come from, I had no idea.
No, I mean, so did any in these sort of like so that's wonderful. It sounds like you had a team of readers for authenticity and accuracy. Especially your poor friend who had to read the draft 4 times. Well, wait, did you get anything? Was there anything that you got particularly wrong that she excoriated?
Of course. I mean, you know, the whole.
Are you willing to admit to any of them?
Of course, sure. I mean, the whole, you know, before transitioning, for me, I always assumed, I mean, I've been friends with forever and ever and ever, but there are things, you know, you don't talk about with friends, like just never thought about asking. I always assumed that one is, say, a boy, and then, you know, they transitions into a woman. But that's not how, you know, my friend saw it, you know, and that's not how most trans women saw it. They were always women, and they saw themselves as women. They just were, so that the actually saying I was a boy is not correct. And not just, we're not talking political correctness, we're talking, it's just not correct. So that I had to put down that I presented myself to the world as a boy. But for her, growing up, she never felt she was a boy. So what I thought was just like, well, you know, you present yourself, you are. For her, absolutely not.
That's a good friend.
Yeah, I mean, again, there were all kinds of questions, you know, that you can't do this, you can't do that.
And well, here's one. Did you actually check? Because this was the one thing where I was like, wait, can an orang? Because it was the Mina in the jungle was actually she was an orangutan, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or gorilla.
Orangutan.
I mean, can orangutans really sense gender?
I don't know, but well, yes, they can.
I was curious. Did you have a zoologist friend in the?
No, I was in Sumatra, and Mina is a real orangutan.
Okay.
Mina attacked males and not females. I mean, I was told that I could not go into that part of the jungle because that's Mina territory.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And?
Huh? I didn't. I never encountered Mina.
Oh, so that was the end of it. It wasn't that you went there and
exactly. Yes.
I see. There were, as a journalist, I had to both laugh and feel a little bit defensive about some of your send-ups of journalists. Although, I mean, you were really sending up white journalists, and hopefully I don't work in this way. But where did that come from? Actually,
that happened. Not to me. I heard that happened.
Oh, I'm sure it happened to me. These things happen in front of me, in fact.
Yeah.
But so was that, was that a slow building rage?
Yes, it's been, again, it's, I mean, if you ask me what is the book about, what is my work about, is the relationship of the dominant cultures toward the other. And I found it fascinating that all these Westerners were there to help, and they were really kind and lovely. But it was truly astounding to me to watch how much they looked at the refugees as the other, as different than them, And I found that fascinating, that you could have a group of volunteers of, an American, a Belgian, an Israeli, a Chinese person and stuff, and they could all get together and become friends and all help the refugees who are the other and who are looked at as the other. And I was fascinated by that. What brings people together, what holds us as we see our commonality, and when do we not see it? Like that, no matter how much a refugee and a volunteer may have in common, they both look at each other as the other. And I was fascinated by that. And that story with the two journalists was the best way that I could describe it. And, that was when, both Mina and her brother Mazen began to separate, as in, we're not that, we're this, and it's an important point in the novel.
I'm waiting to see if there are any questions, but since I haven't gotten any yet, I'm going to continue. You have a sort of a little digression with Francine's first cousin once removed. Actually, I find English much easier for the language of cousinhood than Arabic.
Really?
Arabic will preserve whether it's from the maternal or the paternal side.
And it's more specific.
It's sometimes just nice to be able to say once removed. It's crazy. But I don't need to give the context, but there's this line in there where he sort of says he realizes he was using the pain of others to alleviate his own. And I just wondered if I don't know that it's always that the people who rush to help are there from pure altruism.
It's never pure altruism, and it's never bad or anything. It's a combination of both. It's a combination of altruism reinforces in many ways how we want to view ourselves as people who help. And that was one of the most traumatic things for me personally when I went to Lesbos, is that I began to see the refugees the volunteers that were taking selfies with refugees as they're coming off the boat. And I began to see that I have similar tendencies, which is, I want to be seen as someone who cares. I want to be seen as somebody who's not selfish and self-absorbed. Because usually in my day-to-day, I am selfish and self-absorbed. So I realized that I was here to help to make myself feel better.
Did you actually volunteer on Lesbos?
Oh yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, it's in the book.
Which one? But he had a total breakdown and just sort of locked himself in the room.
What's your problem?
No, okay. So I don't want to assume.
I had a breakdown. I locked myself in a room for 3 days. I was able to do it for 3 days, and then, luckily, like I said, I was not needed. The same situation. So there were so many at that time, because it was across Christmas holidays. There were so many refugees. The first couple of days, I did everything from fold blankets in the storage to whatever. But then I was so overwhelmed talking to that one boy, like in the story, who was talking to his mother, and he just started crying, and I started crying with him. I lost it. And I ended up, I changed hotel rooms. I went into a really nice hotel and locked myself in for 3 days. It was a traumatic experience for me because, and this is, like I said, I wanted to write about that, but I did not want the novel to be about me per se. But then everything always ends up to be about me anyway. But I wanted to show the problems of some of us, those of us who can move between worlds. And when these worlds starts colliding, what do we do, and how do we? And I lost it. Whereas Mina wouldn't have. She would have the same issues that the writer in the novel has, but she'd be able to deal with them.
Because of her profession as a surgeon, or
because of her personality, or whatever. I mean, you probably would have been able to deal with it. For me, as a completely neurotic person who just, has more neurosis than anything I can imagine, I wasn't able to deal with it. And this is after, like I said, after working with Syrian refugees for years. Lesbos was too much. I was in the middle of it, as opposed to somewhat separate. And I think we have a friend in common, Lina Sergi. I mean, I went to a year and a half later. I went to Istanbul and worked with the refugees. There was no problem whatsoever. But in Lesbos, for the first time, I felt really vulnerable because I kept, everywhere I looked, I would see my family. I could not separate.
No, I was on Samos, but in the summer during the huge crush, and then made the journey with them all the way to Germany.
Yeah.
And it was excruciating.
It's excruciating. Now, again, I don't doubt for a second that had I been needed, and I gave everybody my phone number if they needed me or whatever. They didn't. Had I been needed, of course, you find reserves and you do it. But I wasn't, so I broke down and I kept, tumbling and tumbling and tumbling, and then I ended up in a really nice hotel room, very, very nice.
Listening to opera.
Yes.
So let's speak to your schizophrenic, optimist, pessimist, split personality. I mean, Syria, Bilad al-Sham, the Levant, whatever you want to call it, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine. I can barely form the question. What does your pessimist side say? What does your optimist side say? And if that's a stupid question, ignore it. But like, how do you,
it's getting worse and worse. I mean, the trouble is you keep thinking it can't get worse, and it does. Yeah. So is there any optimism? I don't think so. The trouble is, like I said, there's always a spark of optimism, and in sort of towards the end of the book, they start talking about this as to like, I believe that we're really good people, and good people don't do these things to each other, and yet we do, and at the same time, I think there's no way, but we have been trained now in the Levant to look at the other as they're so different from us, and therefore we can torture them or we can kill them, or just 2 days ago a sniper shot a woman on her balcony with 4 kids. Like, why would you do that? How could you live with yourself? It's beyond me. But then the trouble is that for me, I think I look at the world and I think it's all going to hell. So what the hell do I know?
I do want to get to some of the questions. I think we only have 2 minutes left, but obviously I slanted heavily towards the Syrian experience, but this is an interesting question. How would you describe the experience of representing the LGBTQ plus community through your words in a book centered around the Middle East?
I feel fine about it. Almost all my, I am a queer man from the Middle East. Most of my work is centered around queer men and women in the Middle East. I don't have an issue with that. I feel fine about that.
Okay. How far can empathy drive fiction and literary representation? Are there any limits to how much the political experience of the other can be effectively and empathetically communicated by a writer of fiction who is visibly the self? Good one.
Is it visibly what?
That is visibly the self.
Well, this is the thing, is that you can actually make a reader empathize. I just don't think that that's enough. As in, so someone empathizes, so there's this whole, sort of view of literature as, you change one person at a time. Not when you've got, 10 million people coming, having to leave their country. But even if it's just one person, do you change them enough to actually make them, like, even the simplest thing, which is vote differently? No. I don't see the connection. I do not see a connection between empathy and any sort of change in behavior. What I see is empathy, and people go on Twitter and, rant for a little bit, and then they, go back to their, usual life, and nothing changes. It takes more than empathy. It takes the sort of something to change something. There was sorry.
I'm being told time is up, but if you please finish your thought.
Well, I mean, there was a wonderful review, and unfortunately, she's going to hate me, but I can't remember her name. But she's a Syrian writer, a wonderful Syrian. I can't remember her name. I'm sorry, but she said something about this empathy thing. But then she mentions the part in the book where the writer actually goes to the port and buys ferry tickets for these young Afghan boys to go to Athens. And she basically says that the whole book is about empathy. And the important thing is that empathy has to have some form of accompanying action. And I sort of agree with that empathy alone does nothing. It just, you empathize. I mean, maybe it does a little bit, but for the most part, it doesn't change anything.
This is the book, The Wrong End of the Telescope. Do I keep going, folks? I don't know what to do because it looks like the screen is still up. Oh, do you know where that review was, Rabih? I'd like to see it.
The Markaz, I think. The Markaz.
Oh, the Markaz. Oh, okay. Yes, a wonderful literary, or really more of it's all around kind of journal that is out of LA, right? It's sort of, speaking of phoenixes, it was reborn from the ashes of the actual Markaz that folded. I don't know. I mean, I'm happy to continue. Hand back to JLF. Okay. Well, I'm going to hand it back to our host. Thank you, Rabih.
Thank you so much, Alia.
It was a pleasure. Yes. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Bye.
Thank you, Rabih and Alia, for the informative session, giving much needed insights on the refugee crisis. Thank you all for watching and being a great audience. We encourage you to buy the books of our speakers that are available through Brazos bookstore. If you like the session, do consider supporting us with the Support JLF option button on the right-hand side of your screen. We sincerely value your contributions. Once again, we would like to thank all our partners, JLF Houston advisors, donors, for generously supporting us. We hope you all enjoyed this conversation and will tune back in tomorrow for our next session, The Stranger in the Mirror, Rakesh Om Prakash Mehra in conversation with Sanjay K. Roy at 10 a.m. Central Time, 8:30 p.m. IST, 8 a.m. Pacific Time, 9 a.m. Mountain Time, and 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Thank you once again and see you all tomorrow.
So in that sense, I want to democratize the story of innovation. I want to make it clear that anyone can do it.
The basic question that a writer asks, I think, is, what should I write about? And, that's the biggest question. There's no help for you either. And it's a total mystery.
But what is common throughout history, throughout time, is that when you have that upstairs, downstairs thing, there's a certain amount of that you can maintain if you're on top through hard power and hard system.
We're absolutely delighted to be back here with our edition, albeit digitally, of JLF Houston. There are so many wonderful authors and speakers who you will hear over the next few days. And I hope they will power your imagination as they have ours to look into the future, into a brighter tomorrow.